Hello, my name is Bonnie. I'm 69 years old. I spent my life savings to take my family on what I thought would be a dream trip to Japan. I imagined laughter, shared meals, and memories we would cherish forever. But at the airport, everything fell apart. My children abandoned me, leaving me alone, confused and completely helpless. All the small moments during the trip, the little exclusions, the whispered complaints, the impatience I had brushed off, suddenly made sense. I had been used, and the truth hit me harder than I ever expected. Lost and desperate, wandering the bustling terminals of Narita Airport, I felt completely invisible. That's when I met him, a kind, distinguished man named William Chen, a renowned architect returning to New York. He noticed my tears and without hesitation offered guidance, comfort, and help to get me safely home. We spent hours talking, sharing stories, and by the time we boarded the plane together, I felt a glimmer of hope I hadn't known in years. His presence reminded me that kindness still exists and that there are people who see your worth even when your own family does not. When I arrived in New York, I thought I could finally face my children and perhaps heal the wounds from their betrayal. But instead, when they saw the friendship I had formed with William, they were shocked, humbled, and exposed. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. Everything I thought I knew, every expectation I had, was about to come crashing down in ways I never could have imagined. What happened next would change everything, not just for me, but for my entire family. You won't want to miss what comes next. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. I sat at Gate 34 in Narita Airport, the smell of coffee and jet fuel clinging to the air, watching the last few passengers step onto the jet bridge. My flight to New York was boarding, without me. The gate agent's voice echoed in both Japanese and English, calm, polite, final. Final call for Flight 182 to New York. I stared at the boarding pass in my trembling hands, my name printed neatly on it, Bonnie Morrison, my flight, my seat, my ticket home. But my family was already gone. Marcus, Daniel, Victoria, Amanda. They had upgraded themselves to first class and left me behind. I had gone to buy water, just 10 minutes. When I returned, the waiting area was empty. I thought maybe they'd gone ahead to board, that someone would text, "Hurry, Mom, we're at the gate." But my phone remained silent until I opened our group chat. That's when I saw it. Finally free from the old lady, at least we got a free trip. The words blinked on the screen, followed by a string of laughing emojis. I read it again, as if I might have misunderstood, but the message stayed cruel and clear. My fingers froze. My heart seemed to fold in on itself, slow and heavy. They were talking about me. I could barely breathe. Around me, life continued in the indifferent rhythm of travel, the roll of suitcases, the chatter of foreign languages, the smell of miso soup drifting from a nearby cafe. And I sat there, a 69-year-old widow, holding a phone that had just shattered what little was left of my faith in family. Robert's face flashed in my mind, his kind smile, the way his hand would find mine in crowded places. It had been 3 years since he passed. I had spent his life insurance on this trip, thinking it might bring us closer, thinking maybe if I gave them something unforgettable, they'd remember who I was before I became just a burden. I had paid for everything. The flights, the hotels, the temples, the endless shopping sprees. I had watched them laugh together, pose for photos, speak to each other in whispers I wasn't invited into. I had told myself it was fine, that families grow apart sometimes, that I should be grateful just to be near them. But this was different. This was rejection wrapped in luxury, cruelty hidden behind designer luggage. I stood up, shaky, and went to the counter. "Excuse me," I said softly, my voice unsteady. "My family, I think they boarded without me." The gate agent checked the list, her eyes kind but efficient. "Yes, Mrs. Morrison," she said. "They boarded about 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes? My voice cracked, but the gate was still open. She nodded apologetically. "They said you decided to stay behind." For a moment, I couldn't feel my legs. I wanted to argue, to scream, to tell her they were lying. But what was the point? The truth was already sealed behind that closed gate, behind the airplane door that would carry them away from me. The plane began to taxi, and I pressed my palm to the window. I didn't know what I was expecting, to catch a glimpse of their faces, perhaps. Maybe one of them would look out, see me standing there, and realize what they'd done. But the windows were dark, mirrored. They didn't see me. They didn't care to. As the plane lifted off, the hum of the engine seemed to vibrate through my bones, and tears I didn't even feel coming began to fall. My vision blurred. I sat back down, clutching Robert's old travel jacket to my chest, whispering his name like a prayer. I was alone, in a foreign country, abandoned. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time had no shape. I must have looked pathetic, an old woman crying quietly in an airport chair. People passed by, some glancing in pity, others pretending not to see. My mind replayed the group text over and over until the words began to lose meaning, dissolving into a dull ache. I thought of calling Marcus, my oldest, the one who used to run to me after every scraped knee, the one who said I was his hero when he was 8. I typed his name into my phone, stared at the contact photo, him and his wife Amanda smiling on a yacht, and then put the phone down again. What would I even say? Why did you leave me? The truth was, I already knew why. I was no longer useful. I wasn't the mother who made pancakes at midnight, or the woman who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. I was a reminder of mortality, of responsibility, of everything they didn't want to carry anymore. I wiped my face with a trembling hand. My reflection in the glass looked foreign, tired, fragile, smaller than I remembered. And then, just as I thought I couldn't stand another second of the silence, a voice broke through. "Excuse me, are you all right?" I turned. He stood a few feet away, a man in his late 60s, tall, with silver hair and eyes that held both warmth and discipline. His suit was neatly pressed, his posture effortlessly confident. Yet there was something gentle about him, something that made me exhale without realizing I'd been holding my breath. "I'm fine," I lied automatically, though my voice betrayed me. He studied me for a moment, not intrusively, but with a kind of quiet understanding. "You look like someone who just lost more than a flight," he said softly. I let out a weak laugh that turned into a sob. "You could say that." He didn't press. He just sat down beside me, leaving enough space to feel safe. We sat there for a while in silence, the airport loud around us, but somehow distant. "My name's William," he said after a moment. "William Chen." I nodded, trying to collect myself. "Bonnie," I whispered. "Well, Bonnie," he said gently, "whatever happened, you're not invisible. Someone still sees you." Something in me broke then, not from pain this time, but from the simple kindness of being acknowledged. After hours of being treated like a ghost, here was a stranger who noticed I existed. I cried again, this time without shame. William didn't look away. He just sat with me, silent and steady, like a man who had learned to respect another person's grief without needing to fix it. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel completely alone. He sat beside me quietly, not intruding, just existing in that fragile space where grief and silence meet. The kind of silence that doesn't ask questions. It simply waits for your heart to find the courage to speak. After a moment, he said softly, "I'm William Chen, architect." He extended his hand, a small, deliberate gesture that carried warmth instead of pity. "Are you all right?" It was such a simple question, yet it unlocked something inside me. My lips trembled as I tried to answer, but the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. "No," I finally whispered. Not really. He nodded as though he already knew. You don't have to explain if you don't want to. But I did. I needed someone, anyone, to know that I hadn't just been forgotten, that there had been love once, that I wasn't some lost old woman crying in an airport. They left me, I said, my voice cracking like thin ice. My family, my sons, their wives. We were supposed to fly home together. I went to buy water, and when I came back, they were gone. The gate was closing. I thought they'd wait for me. He didn't interrupt. I saw his eyes soften, his jaw tense slightly, as if he were trying to hold back the anger for my sake. I checked my phone, I continued. There was a text. They said they were finally free from the old lady, that at least they got a free trip. I pressed my palms to my face, but the tears came anyway. I didn't even care that we were in the middle of Narita Airport, surrounded by strangers and the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. William leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but firm. You paid for the trip? Yes, I said quietly. I used my husband's life insurance. Robert. He died 3 years ago. I thought it would bring us closer, give them something beautiful to remember. But I was wrong. He exhaled slowly, his voice steady but heavy with feeling. Family should be sacred, Bonnie. What they did to you is unforgivable. The way he said my name, it sounded almost reverent, as if he were grounding me in the moment, reminding me that I was still a person worth addressing directly. For a long while, we just sat there. I could feel the warmth of his presence beside me, not romantic or even comforting in the traditional sense, but grounding, like the calm after a storm, when the world is still bruised but quiet. After some time, he stood up and said, "Come on. You shouldn't stay here by yourself. Let's get you a new ticket." He didn't wait for me to agree. He simply offered his hand. I hesitated, then took it. His palm was firm, reassuring. We walked together toward the airline counter, my small suitcase rolling unevenly behind me. I felt like a child again, being led gently toward safety. William handled everything. He spoke in that clear, composed voice people immediately respect. Within minutes, he had arranged a new flight for me for the following morning. "They'll get you on the first available flight to New York," he said. "Don't worry, you won't be stranded." "You didn't have to do that," I murmured. "I know," he said simply, "but I wanted to." When the clerk printed the new boarding pass, I held it in my hands like a fragile promise. Something about that small piece of paper gave me permission to breathe again. He noticed my exhaustion and gestured toward the airport lounge. "Come. There's no point sitting here all night." The lounge was warm and softly lit, a world away from the bright chaos outside. Plush chairs, quiet music, the smell of green tea and polished wood. We found a corner table near the window, where the runways stretched out like silver ribbons under the Tokyo night sky. William ordered tea for both of us. For a while, we just watched the planes take off and land, the rhythm strangely soothing. Then he said, almost casually, "You remind me of my wife." I looked up, surprised. "She passed away 2 years ago," he said, his voice low. "Cancer. We were married 41 years. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were distant. She was the calm in every storm I ever had. There was something in his expression, a mix of grief and acceptance, that I recognized. It was the same quiet sorrow I saw in my own reflection, the loneliness of someone who'd lost not just a person, but an entire chapter of their life. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He nodded, staring out the window. "She used to say that people are like architecture. Some are built to last, some collapse under the smallest weight. But the ones who endure, those are the ones who let the light in, even through their cracks." He smiled faintly. "You strike me as one of those." I felt my throat tighten. "I don't feel very strong right now." No one does when they're standing in the wreckage, he said. But strength isn't about how you feel. It's about what you do next. We sat there talking for hours, about life, about loss, about how people can fail you in ways you never imagined. He told me about the city he built, the buildings he designed, the legacy he was still shaping even as he approached retirement. And I told him about Robert, how he used to hum Sinatra while cooking, how he always believed our children would grow into kind, grounded adults. He would have been heartbroken to see this, I said quietly. Then honor him by standing taller than their cruelty, William said. Don't let their betrayal define you. Something inside me loosened then, like a knot finally beginning to untie. The bitterness that had been choking me all day softened just enough for me to breathe. We talked until the lounge began to empty and the cleaning staff moved quietly around us. He glanced at his watch and smiled. It's nearly 2 a.m. You should rest. I don't think I can sleep, I admitted. He nodded, then leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Then just rest your heart for a while. Morning always comes, whether we're ready or not. I watched him, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and offered more kindness in one evening than my own family had in years. His calm presence felt like a light in a dark room, steady, gentle, unassuming. Sometime around dawn, I must have dozed off. When I woke, the lounge was bathed in pale golden light. William sat beside me, reading something on his phone. He noticed I was awake and smiled. Morning, Bonnie. You didn't miss your flight this time. I laughed softly, my voice still rough. Thank you for everything. He waved a hand dismissively. We're both heading to New York. I'll help you through the airport. It's a maze even for frequent travelers. I hesitated. You really don't have to. I know, he said again, his tone warm but final. But I'd like to. And so we walked together through Narita that morning, 2 strangers bound by shared solitude, passing through bright hallways lined with duty-free stores and hurried passengers. When we reached the gate, he looked at me and said, You ready? I nodded. As we stepped onto the jet bridge, I glanced out one last time at the Tokyo skyline in the distance. It was strange how a city could hold both heartbreak and healing in the same breath. When the plane took off, I looked at William. He gave me a small, reassuring smile. New beginnings often look like endings, Bonnie, he said quietly. And for the first time since my family left me, I almost believed him. The hum of the airplane filled the space around us like a soft ocean, steady and endless. Somewhere beneath us, Japan was shrinking into clouds, a country I had dreamed of visiting for years and now could barely think about without my stomach twisting. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow, and the faint chatter of passengers faded into white noise. 14 hours between Tokyo and New York. 14 hours suspended between what I had lost and whatever was waiting on the other side. William sat beside me, quietly flipping through the in-flight magazine. Every so often he'd glance at me, not in the way people do when they feel obligated to make conversation, but with that calm, grounded awareness of someone who understands silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, it just is. After a while, he turned slightly toward me. Do you fly often? I shook my head. Not since Robert died. We used to travel sometimes, but after, well, I didn't see much point. The house feels big enough to get lost in. I don't need the world to feel that way too. He gave a faint nod, the corner of his mouth curving in something like empathy. I understand that, he said softly. After my wife passed, I didn't travel for nearly a year. She used to pack my suitcase for every trip. I never realized how much love hides in the smallest gestures until she wasn't there to do them. I looked out the window. The sky beyond the glass was endless and deep, the kind of blue that makes you feel both tiny and infinite all at once. It's strange, I said quietly. You spend your whole life taking care of people, thinking that's what love means. But when they leave you, you have no idea what to do with all that love. It just sits there, heavy inside you, with nowhere to go. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe it doesn't need to go anywhere. Maybe it just changes shape." When I looked back at him, he was smiling in that calm, thoughtful way again. I realized that he wasn't just saying things to comfort me. He meant them. There was truth in his words, the kind that comes from having survived something similar. As the hours drifted by, the distance between us seemed to shrink. Somewhere over the Pacific, I began to feel like I could breathe again. He opened his tablet, scrolling through a series of folders. "Let me show you something," he said. "I always carry these with me. It's sort of my way of keeping track of where I've been." The screen lit up with images, skyscrapers piercing through clouds, glass towers reflecting sunsets, bridges that curved like ribbons of light. "You designed these?" I asked, astonished. He nodded, a hint of pride touching his voice for the first time. Half of Manhattan's skyline, give or take. I stared, recognizing a few of the buildings from news articles and postcards. "You must be famous." He chuckled softly. "Fame fades. Structures last longer than names." He swiped to another image, an old photograph of a younger William standing on a construction site, hard hat, slightly crooked, grinning in the sun. "I'm the founder of Chen and Associates," he said casually. "Maybe you've heard of it." I blinked, searching my memory. "I don't think so," I admitted, feeling a little embarrassed. He laughed, not offended at all. "Good. That means I built well. My goal was always to make people look up at a building and feel inspired, not wonder who built it." There was something so humble in that answer, something that made me see him differently, not as a man defined by success, but by meaning. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked. "Designing?" "Every day," he said. "But architecture, like life, is about knowing when to stop building and start living inside what you've created." That line stayed with me. For the rest of the flight, it echoed in my chest, gentle and wise. Later, after dinner service, when the cabin lights dimmed again and most passengers were asleep, William fell into quiet conversation with me about everything from art to faith to what it means to start over when you think it's too late. I found myself laughing softly, something I hadn't done in days. I told him about my garden back home in Brooklyn, how I'd kept it even after Robert died because he used to say the roses would miss me if I left them. "You strike me as a woman who knows how to keep things alive," William said, his voice low and sincere. "Even the parts of yourself that have been hurt." I looked at him, really looked at him, and something in my chest loosened. "I used to think that was weakness," I said. "It's the opposite," he replied. "To keep loving after being hurt, that's the rarest kind of strength." The way he said it, steady, without hesitation, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a very long time. Hours passed. The plane glided over the ocean, stars flickering outside like distant promises. I felt strangely weightless, not just because of altitude, but because for the first time since the airport, the grief didn't feel like it was crushing me. Somewhere over Alaska, I pulled out my phone. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the fragile realization that maybe I wasn't as invisible as I'd begun to believe. "Would you mind taking a photo with me?" I asked. "Just to remember that not everyone in the world is cruel." William smiled. "Of course." We leaned in, the airplane window casting a soft bluish light over us. I snapped the selfie, me, puffy-eyed but smiling faintly, and William poised and kind, the sort of man who looked like he'd been born knowing how to carry grace. Without thinking too much, I opened Facebook and typed, "New friend helping me get home." I hit post. Almost immediately, tiny red dots began to bloom across the screen. Likes, hearts, comments. The kind of attention I hadn't seen in years. I scrolled for a moment, a little dazed, watching the numbers climb. Then a message appeared. "Marcus, Mom? Is that William Chen? I frowned, confused. A second message arrived seconds later. Daniel, please call us immediately. I stared at the screen, the words flashing like a signal from another world, the world I had just begun to distance myself from. For a moment, I imagined what they were doing right now, sitting in their New York apartments, realizing that the mother they had abandoned had somehow crossed paths with a man whose name apparently carried more weight than theirs ever would. A cold, strange calm washed over me. The old me would have answered. The old me would have apologized, tried to make sense of everything, tried to smooth over the pain they had caused. But not this time. I pressed the side button and watched the screen go dark. The world went silent again, leaving only the low hum of the airplane and the soft breathing of the man beside me. William looked over. Everything all right? I turned to him and smiled. Yes, I said quietly. For the first time in a long while, everything's all right. He nodded, understanding without needing the details. As the plane continued east, dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, a soft gradient of pink and gold spreading across the horizon. The first light of a new day. And somewhere deep inside, I felt something stir. A small, fragile certainty that maybe, just maybe, life still had a way of surprising me. When the cab pulled up in front of my brownstone in Brooklyn, the city was still half asleep. The light was soft, pale, brushing against the facades of the buildings like a slow exhale. I hadn't seen home in weeks, yet for the first time, it didn't feel like home at all. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered my bag, the one that had felt heavier with every airport bench I'd slept on, every silence from my own children. William turned to me, his eyes kind, carrying that quiet understanding I had come to rely on during our strange, beautiful journey across the sky. If you need anything, Bonnie, anything at all, call me. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. You've already done so much. He smiled, gentle, not the kind of smile people wear to look polite, but one born from empathy, from knowing pain firsthand. Sometimes people cross our paths because they're meant to remind us we're not alone. Take care of yourself, okay? I wanted to thank him properly, to tell him that he'd been the first person in a long time who had simply listened, but the words wouldn't form. I just squeezed his hand, watched as his car disappeared down the street, and turned to face my front steps. They were there. Marcus, Daniel, and Victoria, my children and my daughter-in-law, standing as if they'd been rehearsing their expressions. Concern painted on their faces, but not quite believable. Mom! Marcus rushed forward, his voice cracking in that performative way that used to melt me when he was little. Thank God you're safe. We were so worried. I stood still. The morning breeze brushed against my face, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the city, the distant rattle of a subway, a dog barking somewhere, the echo of footsteps on pavement. Then I spoke, my tone calm, but cold. Really? The text said otherwise. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Daniel looked down at his shoes. Victoria, the queen of emotional theatrics, stepped forward, arms outstretched, as if this were some reunion to be filmed. Bonnie, she said softly, we can explain everything. I took a single step back. Don't. Her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. For a brief second, there was silence between us, thick and suffocating, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. It just exists, heavy with all the words that were never said. I looked at them one by one. My sons, the boys I raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights, boys who had once cried for me in the dark, who used to crawl into my bed when thunder scared them. Now they stood there, avoiding my eyes, their bodies tense, like strangers who'd stumbled into the wrong scene. You abandoned your 69-year-old mother in a foreign country, I said, my voice rising, breaking slightly on the word mother. After I spent $40,000 on that trip, for you, Marcus opened his mouth. "Mom, please." I cut him off. "No, you don't get to please me now." Daniel tried to step closer. "It's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I said, every word trembling with the effort to stay composed. "You wanted to save money. You wanted convenience, so you left me there, alone." Their faces told me everything before they could even attempt a defense. Guilt, thinly veiled behind the pretense of misunderstanding. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes flicking nervously toward my front door, then to the street, as if someone might see this. And then he asked it, the question that made my stomach twist. "Mom, please, is that really William Chen? The William Chen?" His voice carried something new. Excitement, hope, greed. I froze. In that moment, everything fell into place. The sudden concern, the desperate attempts to look sorry, the timing of their arrival, as if they had been waiting for me to show up with something valuable. Of course, they didn't care that I was safe. They cared who I was with. "Why?" I asked quietly, almost whispering. "Why does it matter?" Marcus tried to smile to sound casual. "It's just, he's, a big deal. The firm, the projects, the connections. You were traveling with him?" "By accident," I said sharply. "He helped me when no one else did." Daniel nodded eagerly, stepping in like a salesman trying to salvage a deal. "That's incredible, Mom. I mean, we're just glad you met someone like that. Maybe you could introduce us sometime." "Introduce you?" I repeated, stunned. "After what you did to me?" Victoria sighed, crossing her arms. "Bonnie, let's not make this dramatic. We made a mistake, yes, but—" I felt something snap inside me. "A mistake?" My voice rose, echoing through the quiet street. "You left me, in another country, with no ticket, no money, no explanation. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Victoria flinched but tried to recover. "You've always been emotional, Bonnie. Maybe you misread the situation." That word, emotional, the one they used whenever they wanted to dismiss me, reduce me to some fragile, overreacting woman. I stared at her, then at my sons, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. Not as my children, but as people I had spent a lifetime excusing. Marcus tried again, his tone soft, pleading. "Mom, we just need to talk. Can we come inside?" I shook my head slowly. "Not today. Please." I stepped back toward the door. "I need peace, something none of you ever gave me." They stood there, uncertain, not knowing what to do when manipulation no longer worked. For years, I had been the one who apologized first, who filled the silence with comfort, who fixed everything that broke, emotional or otherwise. But not anymore. "I met someone," I said finally, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from newfound strength. Someone who reminded me what kindness looks like, what respect feels like, and I realized I've been starving for both. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So you're just going to walk away from your own family?" I looked at him, really looked. "You already did." The air between us cracked like glass. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Marcus muttered something under his breath, grabbed Victoria's arm, and turned toward the car. Daniel followed silently. I stood there until the car disappeared, the street returning to stillness. My legs felt weak, but my heart was steady. Inside the brownstone, the air smelled faintly of dust and lavender. The quiet was strange, almost foreign, but peaceful. I placed my bag by the stairs and sat down on the couch, staring out the window. On the table lay my phone, screen dark. I picked it up, thumb hovering over William's contact. He had said, "If you need anything, Bonnie." And maybe, for once, I didn't need someone to fix things. I just needed someone who saw me. I didn't call him that night, but I smiled faintly for the first time in a long time. Because even though the reckoning had just begun, I knew something had shifted inside me. They could have their explanations, their excuses, their shallow guilt. I had something far more powerful now, clarity. And that, I realized, was the beginning of my freedom. When I opened the door to my brownstone that afternoon, I thought the confrontation was over. I thought the silence they left behind would be enough to hold me steady, at least for a few hours. But grief and greed have strange ways of returning. I had just placed my coat on the hanger when I heard footsteps behind me, quick, hesitant, and familiar. "Mom, wait!" Marcus's voice. I turned slowly, my hand still on the coat rack. The three of them stood in the doorway again, Marcus, Daniel, and Amanda. Their faces were pale, desperate, eyes darting between one another like they'd drawn straws to decide who would speak first. I sighed, exhaustion pooling in my chest. I thought I made myself clear. "Please," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Just hear us out." There was a tremor in his voice that once would have softened me. Once, I would have folded instantly at the sound of my sons asking for mercy. But the woman they used to manipulate, the woman who justified every betrayal with, "They're still my children," she was gone. I didn't invite them in. But they came anyway, crossing the threshold like uninvited ghosts. Their presence filled the room with that same tension that had shadowed my home for years, the kind of air you could cut with a knife. Amanda spoke first. Her tone was polished, controlled, but beneath it was panic. "Bonnie, we made a terrible mistake. What happened in Japan? It wasn't what you think." I folded my arms. "Oh, it's exactly what I think." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing near the sofa. "We were under pressure, Mom. The business, everything was falling apart." Something about the word business made my stomach tighten. Marcus leaned forward, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, just let us explain before you decide anything." I didn't want to hear it. But I was tired, too tired to fight, too tired to stand on principle. So I gestured to the couch. 5 minutes, I said. That's all. They exchanged glances, as if they'd rehearsed this, as if there was a script somewhere labeled, "How to Win Back Mom's Sympathy." Amanda sat on the edge of the sofa, clasping her manicured hands together. "It's Daniel's firm," she began, her tone trembling. "It's going bankrupt." The words landed like a dull thud in the quiet room. She continued, voice cracking for the first time. "We've lost 2 major investors. The market's brutal right now, and we're hanging by a thread." Daniel let out a sharp exhale. "We were hoping Chen and Associates might partner with us. Just one collaboration, one project. It would keep us afloat." The room fell silent. I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. "Wait," I said slowly. "You're telling me that's why you left me in Japan? Because of your firm?" "No," Marcus interjected too quickly. "It wasn't like that." Amanda cut him off, her voice trembling now with frustration. "We panicked. You were getting close to William Chen. You had dinner with him. You were talking, laughing. Daniel thought—" Daniel shot her a glare. "Amanda, stop." But she didn't stop. She looked right at me, her expression a mixture of fear and guilt. "He thought maybe if you stayed a little longer, you could convince Chen to meet with us. That's why—" I felt my breath catch. "That's why you didn't show up at the airport." Amanda nodded weakly. "We were going to come back for you, but things got complicated." "Complicated?" I whispered, my hands trembling now. "You left me alone in a foreign country to network?" Daniel's eyes filled with shame. "Mom, it wasn't just that. My firm is drowning. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if we could just—" I raised a hand, stopping him cold. "No, don't you dare justify this." He fell silent. I turned to Marcus. "And you?" Marcus hesitated, then swallowed hard. "My architecture career is stalling. You know how competitive it is out there. One project with William Chen would change everything." I stared at him, stunned. My son, The boy who used to build castles out of cardboard and tell me he'd design skyscrapers one day was standing in front of me asking for a shortcut bought with betrayal. "So you used me in Japan," I said quietly, "and now you want to use me again?" Marcus's face flushed. "It's not like that." "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "It's exactly like that." Amanda's composure cracked. She leaned forward, her tone sharp, pleading. "You don't understand how important this is." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "I understand perfectly. You want an introduction." Their faces changed instantly. Hope flickered in their eyes like a match catching flame. They thought I was yielding. Marcus took a step closer. "So you'll—" I cut him off, my voice firm, steady. "Get out of my house." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden floor beneath their shifting feet. Amanda blinked, stunned. "Bonnie," I said, "get out." Daniel's voice broke. "Please, we're just asking for one chance." "I gave you thousands of chances," I said, every word trembling with the weight of all the times I had forgiven them. "And you turned everyone into another wound. Not this time." They looked lost, like children again. But this time, I didn't move to comfort them. I didn't reach out, didn't soften my voice. I had finally learned that mercy without respect is just another form of self-destruction. Marcus's jaw clenched. He turned away first, muttering under his breath, but I didn't care enough to listen. Amanda followed, wiping her eyes, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Daniel was last. He lingered in the doorway, eyes red, mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. I closed the door behind them. The click of the lock sounded final, almost sacred. For a moment I just stood there, my heart pounding, my chest tight. Then the tears came, not from sadness, but from release, from the realization that for once I had chosen myself. The house was quiet again. Sunlight poured through the curtains, golden and forgiving. I sank into the armchair by the window, hands trembling as I reached for my phone. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing his name, William Chen. When he answered, his voice was warm, steady, exactly the sound I needed to hear. "Bonnie?" I swallowed hard. "Remember when you said if I needed anything?" He paused, sensing something in my tone. "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I need a favor." He didn't hesitate. "Tell me." And in that moment, between his calm, unwavering voice and the chaos I had just expelled from my life, I realized that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was courage. The courage to start over, even when the people you love are the ones who break you. When I told William my plan, he threw his head back and laughed, a full, delighted laugh that filled the quiet of his study like music. "Bonnie," he said, shaking his head, "you're brilliant." I wasn't sure if it was brilliance or just pain sharpened into precision, but I smiled anyway. "They've been playing games their whole lives, William. It's time someone taught them that family isn't a currency." He leaned back in his chair, still smiling, but his eyes softened as he studied me. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I've been ready since the day they left me at that airport," I said. He nodded, a look of understanding passing between us, the kind only two people who have known betrayal too deeply could share. For the next 2 weeks, I planned every detail carefully. I rehearsed my lines in the mirror until they sounded natural, even gentle. I practiced my smile, not too wide, not too stiff, just the right amount of warmth to make them believe I was forgiving. Forgiveness. It was such a strange word. I used to think it meant letting others off the hook. Now, I understood it meant setting yourself free first. I waited for the right day, a quiet Thursday evening when I knew they'd all be home. My hands trembled slightly as I typed the group message. "Dinner at my place this Sunday. I've been thinking about our last conversation. Maybe I was too harsh. It didn't take long for the replies to come in. Marcus, Mom, really? Thank you. We'd love that. Daniel, we've missed you. See you Sunday. Amanda even added a heart emoji. I almost laughed at that. The following days passed in a blur of careful preparation. I cooked, not because I had to, but because I wanted the setting to feel disarming, familiar. The smell of rosemary chicken and baked apples filled my kitchen, wrapping the house in a warmth I hadn't felt in years. By the time the doorbell rang, my heart was steady. When I opened the door, they were all there. Marcus in a crisp navy suit, Daniel holding a bouquet of flowers like a peace offering, Amanda and Victoria behind them with overly bright smiles. Mom, Marcus said, stepping forward, you look amazing. I smiled softly. Thank you. Come in. We sat around the dining table, the clinking of silverware filling the silence between forced pleasantries. I poured the wine and watched them sip it, eyes darting toward me, waiting for some sign that the storm had passed. Finally, I set my glass down and folded my hands. I've thought a lot about what you said, I began, keeping my voice low, calm. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I reacted out of hurt. Daniel nodded eagerly. You had every right to be upset, Mom. What happened in Japan? I raised a hand gently, cutting him off. It's in the past now. I've decided to move forward. Amanda let out a breath of visible relief, placing a hand over her chest. We're so glad to hear that. I gave a small smile. Actually, there's something else I wanted to share. They leaned in slightly, curiosity flickering in their eyes. I've been spending some time with William, I said casually, as though it were nothing. He's been kind, helping me get back on my feet, and he told me something that I think you'll find interesting. Marcus's head tilted. Oh, he's hosting a gala at the Museum of Modern Art, I continued. He's announcing his retirement project, his final masterpiece. He invited me as his guest. For a brief moment, silence. Then Daniel's glass hit the table with a soft clink. William Chen's retirement gala? I nodded. That's right. Apparently the entire New York design community will be there. Amanda's eyes widened. That's monumental. I let my fingers brush lightly against the rim of my glass, feigning hesitation. He told me I could bring someone. I thought, maybe I could introduce you properly. Marcus's jaw dropped slightly. He blinked a few times as though trying to process my words. Mom, he whispered, voice trembling, are you serious? I smiled. Of course. You've both been through so much with your careers. Maybe this could help mend things. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders collapsing all at once. His eyes glistened as he leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. Mom, thank you. This means everything. Daniel's expression mirrored his brother's, a mix of shock and fragile relief. We're so sorry for Japan, he said quietly. We were selfish. We didn't think. But you giving us this chance... He trailed off, voice breaking. Amanda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're incredible, Bonnie. Truly. Victoria added softly, It's so good to see you like this again. I let their words wash over me like soft rain, not because I believed them, but because I wanted them to. They needed to believe this peace was real. I tilted my head, giving them a kind smile. I know you'll make it up to me. Daniel nodded vigorously. We will, I promise. Marcus raised his glass. To family, he said, his tone heavy with relief. I hesitated for just a second before lifting mine. To family, I echoed. The words tasted hollow on my tongue, but the satisfaction blooming inside me was anything but empty. As the dinner went on, they laughed, they reminisced, they tried so hard to erase what they'd done with charm and nostalgia. But I could see the flickers of greed return when I mentioned the MoMA event again. They hid it behind polite smiles, but I saw it. the spark of ambition that had always burned brighter in them than love ever did. When they finally left, I walked them to the door. Marcus hugged me tightly, whispering, "You have no idea how much this means." Daniel kissed my cheek. "You're the best mom anyone could ask for." Amanda squeezed my hand once more before stepping into the night. I stood there long after they were gone, the echoes of their gratitude fading into the quiet street. Then I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled. The night felt heavy, but not with regret. With purpose. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself another glass of wine, and stared at my reflection in the window. There was something new in my eyes, a calmness, maybe even strength. For so long I had been the one they manipulated, the one who believed love meant enduring betrayal. But now, I was the one pulling the strings. I picked up my phone and sent a message to William. They took the bait. A few seconds later, the screen lit up with his reply. Good. Then it's time they learned what justice looks like. I smiled, my reflection catching the faintest curve of triumph. The trap was set, not out of vengeance, but out of something deeper. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about teaching them that love is not something you can steal, sell, or take for granted. As I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I whispered softly into the darkness, "I know you will, my darlings. I know you will." The lights of the Museum of Modern Art shimmered like falling stars. Every reflection on the glass walls seemed alive, like New York itself was holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of champagne and lilies, that quiet perfume of wealth that I once admired from afar. Tonight, I wasn't an outsider. I was walking into that light. My hands trembled as I stepped from the car. William offered his arm with that steady, grounding smile of his. "You're radiant," he said softly. I wanted to reply, to laugh it off, but the words got caught somewhere between my heart and my throat. The red gown he had helped me choose hugged me with gentle certainty. It wasn't just a dress. It was courage stitched into fabric. I could almost hear my own pulse echoing beneath the pearls on my wrist. Inside, everything sparkled. The chandeliers cast golden circles across polished marble. Waiters floated through the crowd like dancers, carrying trays of champagne that shimmered in the light. 300 guests, New York's most polished, poised, and powerful. For a moment, I felt like a stranger again, small and trembling beneath the weight of my own story. And then I saw them, Marcus and Daniel, my sons, standing near the entrance, their wives adjusting their jewelry, their eyes wide as they took in the crowd. They looked nervous, but also hopeful. Daniel caught my gaze first. His expression softened, and for the first time in months, it didn't carry anger or avoidance. "Mom," he whispered as he approached, his voice cracking. "You look incredible." Marcus, too, looked at me like he was seeing someone new. "I can't believe this is happening," he said, smiling with the excitement of a child. "William Morrison and the MoMA Gala. You really did this." I smiled, my lips steady even though my heart trembled. "I told you," I said gently. "I wanted us to have a night of peace, a night to start over." William joined us just then, elegant in his black tuxedo, his calmness anchoring the air around him. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said, shaking their hands with warmth. "I'm honored you could make it." Marcus nearly stumbled over his words. "The honor's ours, sir. We've heard so much about your work." William smiled. "I imagine you have. And tonight you'll see something very close to my heart." As he led me toward the main hall, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirrored wall, a woman transformed. My gray-streaked hair was pinned in a soft wave, my eyes bright beneath the chandelier's light. The pain that once lived in my face had given way to something else. Quiet power, perhaps. Grace born from surviving humiliation and loss. When we reached the stage, I could feel my sons watching me. William squeezed my hand briefly before stepping toward the microphone. His voice filled the hall with that effortless authority artists carry when their soul speaks through creation. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "Tonight, I have the privilege of announcing my final project before retirement." Applause filled the room like a wave. Marcus and Daniel exchanged looks of awe, both of them practically vibrating with anticipation. They thought they knew what was coming. That William's announcement would mean new opportunities, new wealth, new connections they could step into through me. They didn't yet understand that tonight wasn't about them. William smiled, letting the applause fade before he continued. "But before I tell you about the project," he said, "I want to share a story about an incredible woman I met." My breath caught. The lights dimmed slightly, and the massive screen behind him flickered to life. I heard the first sound of my own laughter, captured in a photo William had taken during one of our afternoon walks in Central Park. Another image appeared, me standing by the window of his studio, looking out at the skyline as golden light poured in. The whispers began. Guests leaned toward one another, curious. William's voice, deep and steady, carried through the room. "This is Bonnie Morrison," he said. "2 months ago, her family abandoned her in Tokyo, after she spent her life savings giving them what she thought was a dream vacation." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My sons froze. I could feel Marcus's stare burning into the back of my neck. Daniel's wife covered her mouth. My heart thudded painfully, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. William continued, his tone gentle but unwavering. "When I met Bonnie, she had returned home with nothing but her dignity and a quiet kind of strength. She believed her story was over, but what she didn't know was that her courage to keep showing up, even when love betrayed her, was about to inspire something extraordinary." On the screen, more images appeared. Photos of me sketching in his studio, smiling shyly as he adjusted lighting for his sculptures, standing in front of an unfinished piece shaped like wings unfolding. The audience was silent now. Only William's voice filled the space. "My final project," he said slowly, "is called The Art of Forgiveness. It's a collection of sculptures and visual stories inspired by human resilience, by the moments when we are broken and still choose to love again." He turned toward me. "And it's dedicated to Bonnie Morrison, whose grace reminded me why I became an artist." Applause erupted, first soft and uncertain, then building until it felt like a tidal wave. I stood frozen in the middle of it, tears burning behind my eyes. Every sound blurred into a hum. Every face became a blur of color and light. William smiled at me, reassuring, proud. And in that moment, I felt something shift deep within me. Marcus rose suddenly, his chair scraping against the marble. His voice, trembling with shock, cut through the applause. "Mom, what is this? You told us we were coming for your friend's event." I turned to face him. My voice was soft, but it carried. "I did, and I told you I knew you'd make things right." Daniel's face had gone pale. You told him everything?" William answered for me, his tone kind but sharp as glass. "She didn't tell me everything. I saw what she carried, the pain, the betrayal. The truth has a way of showing itself, doesn't it?" For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, like a mirror forcing them to see themselves clearly for the first time. Then, slowly, Marcus sat down. His eyes glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. Daniel looked away, his hands trembling as he gripped the tablecloth. The applause started again, gentler this time, warmer, like a wave of understanding moving through the room. William reached for my hand. "Ready to stand up there with me?" he whispered. I nodded, though my throat ached with emotion. We stood together as the crowd rose in ovation. The red gown shimmered under the lights, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole. As I looked at my sons, still sitting, silent and shaken. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt release. They were finally seeing me not as the mother who served and sacrificed, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes. And in that moment, I knew that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was the quiet power to walk into the light and let it stay. The applause that had filled the hall moments before died abruptly, like a candle snuffed out mid-flicker. The silence that followed was dense, unforgiving. I could hear the faint clink of a glass somewhere, a cough quickly stifled, the hum of air conditioning above us. Every one of the 300 guests seemed to hold their breath at once, their eyes darting between the glowing stage and the shadows where my sons sat. William's voice broke that silence, not loud, but steady, deliberate. "Her sons, Marcus and Daniel Morrison," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room, "are here tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave striking glass. A single spotlight moved across the tables until it landed squarely on Marcus. He flinched under its brightness, blinking rapidly, as if light itself were too heavy to bear. Another spotlight followed, illuminating Daniel beside him, pale and frozen, his jaw tight. I could feel my pulse drumming in my wrists. This wasn't vengeance. I had told myself that over and over. But watching my children squirm under that truth, under the very same scrutiny I once endured in silence, tore at something deep inside me. William didn't look at me. His eyes remained fixed on the audience as he continued. They came tonight hoping I'd partner with their failing firms. His tone wasn't cruel, only factual, cold and clear, like water poured over fire. The screen behind him flickered. At first, the images were small, grainy, messages, timestamps, familiar names. Then the words appeared, large enough for the entire room to read. Victoria's message first, finally free from the old lady. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God!" Then Amanda's message followed. "At least we got a free trip." I heard a collective murmur, soft but sharp, like the sound of glass cracking. Marcus shifted in his seat, his face paling as the next line appeared on screen. His own words. "She'll figure out how to get home." The room seemed to shrink around us. Every face turned toward them, judgment reflected in curious eyes, sympathetic frowns, raised eyebrows. The same world they once tried so hard to impress now watched them crumble. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to hide, but to breathe. My hands trembled slightly at my sides. Every word on that screen had been a wound carved into my memory. Every emoji, every careless laugh, every cruel syllable that once cut me alone. Now they hung in the air for everyone to see. Daniel suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "This is a setup!" he shouted, voice trembling. "You can't just... This is private!" Security moved quickly, stepping forward to form a silent barrier near the exits. William didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Daniel and said, "Sit down, son." The way he said son, calm, steady, almost fatherly, cut deeper than anger could. Daniel froze, chest heaving, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. William turned back to the microphone. "Bonnie asked me to teach you something about family." The words hung in the air. For a long moment, no one dared move. My throat tightened. I hadn't expected him to say it that way. My plan had been about truth, not spectacle, but William had turned it into something else, something bigger than both of us. His tone softened now, carrying warmth, not blame. "Family," he said, "is not defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who shows up when everything falls apart. It's about grace, loyalty, and the courage to choose love when resentment feels easier." He turned to me then, his expression gentle. "Bonnie did that. Even after what happened, she wanted her sons here tonight. Not to humiliate them, but to give them a chance to see her heart, unfiltered by guilt or fear." I swallowed hard, my eyes burning. The lights were too bright. The air felt thick. Marcus had gone completely still, staring down at the tablecloth as though the world beyond it no longer existed. William stepped away from the microphone and looked directly at them. "You have a choice," he said quietly. "You can run from what you did, or you can let it break you open and start again." His words lingered, echoing through the vast hall like a prayer. Daniel's wife, Amanda, reached for his hand, but he pulled away. His face was streaked with tears he didn't bother to hide anymore. "We didn't mean," he started, his voice cracking. "We didn't mean to hurt her. I found my voice before he could finish. "You just forgot I was human," I said softly. It wasn't accusation. It was truth spoken quietly, like a confession. He looked at me, his face folding into anguish. Marcus's lips trembled. For the first time in his adult life, he looked small again, lost in the glare of consequence. Around us, the audience remained silent, the weight of empathy pressing down like gentle gravity. There was no cruelty in their eyes, only sorrow, a collective awareness that families break in many ways, not always with shouting, sometimes just with silence. William placed his hand on my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of it, the calm he carried, even as my heart raced. "Bonnie," he whispered, "you don't have to say anything more." But I did. I needed to. "I raised them the best I could," I said, turning toward the crowd, but speaking mostly to my sons. "I gave them everything, time, love, forgiveness, because I believed that's what a mother does. But I also learned something these past months. Love without respect destroys you quietly. It makes you disappear one day at a time." I took a slow breath. "I don't want revenge. I just want them to see me. To see that the woman who packed their lunches, who stayed up through their heartbreaks, who sold her jewelry to send them to college, that woman still exists. She just finally remembered her worth." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, one by one, the audience began to rise, not in shock this time, but in understanding. The applause was soft at first, like rain, then grew louder, fuller, until it filled every corner of the museum. Marcus buried his face in his hands. Daniel's shoulders shook as he cried openly. I didn't go to them, not yet. Sometimes love needs distance to heal. Sometimes truth has to sting before it can soothe. William stepped forward again. "That," he said, gesturing to me, "is what family is about. Not perfection, not pride, but the courage to tell the truth and to stand tall in it." As the applause swelled, I felt tears spill freely down my cheeks. The light was warm on my face, and though my heart ached, there was peace beneath it. For the first time, I didn't feel like a mother abandoned. I felt like a woman who had finally come home. To herself. The sound of applause still lingered in the vast marble hall when William returned to the stage. The lights softened, cascading gently over his face as he adjusted the microphone. The screens behind him faded from the painful truth they had just revealed to the calm blueprints of something new, lines, curves, and shapes that seemed to breathe hope. He smiled, but it was not the kind of smile meant for charm or cameras. It was one of quiet resolve. "Now," he said, his voice steady, "let's talk about why we're really here tonight." A murmur rippled through the audience. My sons straightened in their chairs, trying to compose themselves, though the shame still clung to them like a second skin. Victoria dabbed her eyes with a trembling handkerchief. Amanda stared blankly ahead, her face pale under the golden lights. William continued, "For decades, I've been privileged to design buildings that shape skylines, homes, towers, museums, spaces that outlast us all. But I've come to realize something. Architecture isn't just about building upward. It's about building people, too." The room fell utterly still again. "My final project," he said, pausing long enough for every heartbeat to hang in the air, "is a $200 million community center in Brooklyn." The crowd reacted instantly. There was a collective intake of breath, murmurs rising like low thunder. It wasn't just a number, it was legacy. The kind of project every firm in New York dreamed of, the kind of contract that defined careers and generations. I turned my head slightly. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound coming out. Daniel's hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. William's next words came calmly, with the weight of someone who already knew the storm his announcement would bring. Every major architecture firm in New York has been fighting for this contract, he said. Some of them even sent me proposals that could have made me reconsider retirement. He let the words sink in before adding, "But I made my decision long before tonight." The screen behind him changed again, showing the image of a small, modest office, bare walls, a single computer, and a young woman smiling shyly in front of a drawing board. "I'm giving the project," he said slowly, "to Cooper and Associates, run by a young woman who spent years caring for her elderly parents while building her business from nothing." Gasps filled the air. A few people even clapped spontaneously. Somewhere in the back, a woman, perhaps one of the firm's employees, covered her mouth in disbelief. Marcus's jaw dropped. "No," he whispered under his breath, the word slipping out like a prayer turned curse. Daniel stared at the floor, blinking hard, as though his mind refused to process what he had just heard. William continued, his tone warm now, resolute but filled with quiet compassion. "This project isn't about prestige or profit," he said. "It's about honoring sacrifice. It's about valuing kindness in a world that often mistakes cruelty for strength." The words struck me like a gentle wind through an open window, soft, yet powerful enough to move something inside. I felt tears welling again, though this time they carried no bitterness. They were clean tears, of understanding, of release. "And," William said, turning toward me now, his eyes meeting mine with a faint smile, "I'm making a personal donation of $2 million to elder care advocates, in Bonnie Morrison's name." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the applause began. It started with one person, then two, then all at once the room erupted in thunderous ovation. The sound swelled, filling the high ceilings of the museum like waves crashing on distant shores. People rose to their feet, cheering, some wiping their eyes, others nodding to themselves as though justice, at long last, had found a face they could recognize. My breath caught in my throat. My name, spoken so publicly, tied to something noble, something pure, felt almost unreal. For years I had lived as background in my own story, invisible behind the needs of others. Now I stood beneath the light, no longer as a victim, but as the symbol of something good. Beside me, my sons remained seated, frozen, their faces drained of color. The applause rolled over them like a tide they couldn't escape. Marcus's lips quivered. He whispered something to Daniel, something lost beneath the noise, but I saw the shape of his words. It was supposed to be ours. Amanda covered her face with both hands. Victoria sat stiffly, tears running down her cheeks. But I knew that kind of crying. It wasn't repentance, it was humiliation. The collapse of pride, not the awakening of conscience. Reporters swarmed forward as the clapping softened into murmurs again. Cameras flashed. The spotlight shifted to where I stood, and one journalist, her notebook trembling slightly in her hand, stepped closer. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice trembling between awe and curiosity. "How does this feel?" I looked at her for a moment, then turned my gaze toward my sons. They stared back at me, two men I had once cradled, fed, defended, forgiven. Their eyes were glassy, their faces etched with disbelief. For so long, I had wanted them to understand the pain of being unseen. Now, they finally did. I let the silence stretch for a moment, feeling the weight of it settle around us. Then, softly but clearly, I said, Justice feels like finally putting myself first. The words hung in the air, simple yet seismic. For me, they were not born from spite, but from rebirth. A declaration that love could coexist with self-respect, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting who I was. The crowd erupted again, but this time, I didn't hear applause as noise. It felt like wind lifting the pieces of my heart higher, scattering the last traces of guilt that had kept me chained. William smiled at me from the stage, a glimmer of quiet pride in his eyes. He didn't need to say a word. He understood that what happened tonight wasn't just his doing, it was mine too. I had allowed my truth to step into the light, and it had changed everything. My sons remained motionless, still trying to breathe beneath the weight of their choices. I didn't hate them. I didn't even pity them. I simply let them be. Healing, after all, wasn't about watching others fall. It was about standing tall after years of being bent. When the event finally ended, I walked toward the exit slowly, the click of my heels echoing softly against the polished floor. Strangers stopped me along the way, some touching my arm, others simply whispering, "You're incredible," or "You deserve this." I thanked them, one by one, my voice calm, my heart full. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the city hum around me, alive, electric, forgiving. The skyline glimmered above, and for the first time in years, I didn't see it as a world that had forgotten me. I saw it as one that had finally made space for me to belong. Behind me, through the glass doors of the museum, I caught a glimpse of William talking to a group of journalists, his posture relaxed, his expression soft. He glanced my way, our eyes meeting across the distance. He smiled, a small, knowing smile, and gave a subtle nod. I returned it with gratitude, and as I walked into the night, I thought of every mother, every woman, every soul who had ever given too much of themselves in the name of love. I hoped they would see this story someday, not as revenge, but as a reminder that sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about remembering your own worth and daring to live by it. 6 months had passed since that night at the Museum of Modern Art, but the memory of it still shimmered in my mind, like sunlight caught in the folds of a window curtain. Life had changed, subtly at first, then all at once. The humiliation, the anger, the long months of quiet reflection, they had given way to something new. Purpose, clarity, and finally, peace. I walked through the sleek corridors of Williams' architectural firm in Brooklyn, my footsteps soft against the polished wood floors. The walls were lined with renderings of buildings both completed and imagined, architectural dreams brought to life in ink and digital pixels. I paused for a moment, looking at a model of a community center William had recently designed, and I felt a surge of pride. Not because of the architecture itself, but because of what it represented. "Good morning," William's voice called from his office, warm and familiar. He emerged with his usual calm grace, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "I see you're already inspecting the model," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I couldn't help myself," I replied, smiling as I accepted one of the cups. "It's beautiful, William, but even more than that, it's meaningful." He leaned against the doorway, studying me with that steady, discerning gaze of his. "Bonnie," he said softly, "your heart for people is exactly what this company needs. Your insight, your empathy, it makes everything we do here more than just buildings. It makes it impact." I felt my chest tighten, a familiar warmth spreading through me. I had never thought of myself as someone capable of shaping the world beyond my own small acts of kindness. Yet here I was, hired as a community outreach consultant, entrusted with connecting the firm to the people who would live, work, and thrive in these spaces we designed. "Thank you," I said quietly. "It means more than I can say." Over the past 6 months, the aftermath of the gala had rippled outward. Marcus and Daniel had sent letters, each one dripping with apology, regret, and attempts to justify themselves. I hadn't responded. Why? Not out of spite, but because forgiveness wasn't about opening the door again. It was about closing a chapter with dignity. Their lives had shifted without my intervention. Clients who had once relied on their charm vanished when the story of Japan and the gala went viral. Victoria and Amanda, the faces of arrogance and entitlement, had filed for divorce. Their lives had changed as consequences always do, but without me needing to act. Today, William and I were preparing to present a new initiative, a housing project for widows and widowers. It was designed to provide not just shelter, but community, companionship, and care for people too often forgotten by a world that prizes youth over wisdom. We reviewed the presentation together, discussing layouts, program details, and outreach strategies. "Robert would be proud of you," William said suddenly, squeezing my hand gently. I paused, feeling my throat tighten. Robert, my late husband, had spent his life saving, planning, and hoping for a future that included love, family, and care. His sacrifice, the money I had once spent to provide a dream vacation for my ungrateful children, had been intended to honor them. And yet, perhaps this work, this project, this new life, was the legacy he had unknowingly funded. Not a family vacation, not empty gestures for children who couldn't see beyond themselves, but a new chapter where I finally mattered. I looked at William, his eyes meeting mine with that quiet understanding that had become our shared language. "Maybe he would be," I whispered. "Maybe this is what it was meant for." The phone on my desk buzzed, displaying Marcus's name again. I glanced at it, then silenced it without hesitation. My heart felt light. The past had lost its power over me. I turned back to William, smiling in a way I hadn't allowed myself in years. "Ready to change some lives, partner?" I asked. "Always," he replied, returning my smile with his calm, steady warmth. As we walked toward the presentation room together, I felt a rush of exhilaration. The lights were bright, the screens ready, the community representatives waiting to hear our vision. I breathed deeply, savoring the moment. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive, not just surviving, but thriving. I thought of the years I had spent giving everything to others, often to those who didn't appreciate it. And now, at last, my efforts were aligned with purpose, with impact, with people who mattered. I was shaping more than buildings. I was shaping lives, hearts, and communities. And I would do so unapologetically, with courage and joy. William nudged me gently toward the podium. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of history and hope balanced perfectly. My gaze swept across the room, imagining the widows and widowers who would soon find homes not just of brick and wood, but of respect, dignity, and care. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions rising inside me, "we are honored to present this initiative, not just as architects, but as people who believe in the power of community, the power of compassion, and the power of second chances." William stood beside me, his hand brushing mine for reassurance. I smiled, feeling the warmth of partnership, friendship, and shared purpose. Today, the story that began in Tokyo, that unfolded through betrayal and revelation, had transformed into a story of hope and renewal. My life, once defined by sacrifice for those who could not see me, was now defined by vision, empathy, and action. And as the first slides of the project illuminated the room, I felt it fully. The freedom to live for myself, to give meaning where it mattered, and to embrace a future shaped by courage, not fear. For the first time in decades, I felt whole, powerful, and alive. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more journeys of resilience, empowerment, and transformative justice, be sure to subscribe to the channel. New stories, insights, and inspirations are coming. Don't miss them.